Please be seated.
Mr. McCloskey, I know that the first 38 minutes of today's sittings was dedicated to something else. So you had 38 minutes less. Do you think you would be able to finish your opening statement today?
No, Mr. President, as I look at it and as I realize the pace I'm going, I don't think so. I would like, if possible, to have at least a couple of hours tomorrow.
Yes. And can I then kindly ask you to stop 10 minutes before the scheduled time of 13:45, so that we'll have some oral submissions on the outstanding motion on protective measures, so that will then proceed to decide it either later on today or earlier or later on tomorrow.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
All right. Well, as I've stated, Chapter 2, I entitled the attack on the Srebrenica enclave. By May and June of 1995, the VRS had finally been able to engage itself to focus on the enclaves, and they developed an attack plan to do just that, and it lays out the attack and the purpose of the attack. And I would like to go to that plan to just show you one part of it that is important for what I've been saying in the theme of the case. And that is page 3 of what is entitled the Command of the Drina Corps Military Secret Krivaya 95, and basically lays out the situation, the military situation, and assigns the units that are going to be taking part. And I want to point out to you in page 3, the third paragraph from the top. If we could go to that in English. And I'll read it slowly. The command of the Drina Corps, pursuant to Operations Directive Number 7 and 7.1. Now, if you recall, Directive 7 was the one that said, make life unbearable for the inhabitants of Srebrenica. So basically, again, and I'll quote, pursuant to Operations Directive Number 7 and 7.1 of the VRS, main staff, and on the basis of the situation in the Corps area of responsibility, has the task of carrying out offensive activities with free forces deep in the Drina Corps zone as soon as possible in order to split apart the enclaves of Žepa and Srebrenica and reduce them to their urban areas. Now, as we said before, separate the enclaves is a legitimate military concern. But look at this, the last part, reduce them to their urban areas. Now, both enclaves are some 50 to 60 kilometers in diameter, and the bulk of the population of Srebrenica, which is some 30,000, perhaps even more, live outside the roughly 1 kilometer by 2 kilometer urban area. And so if you attack that enclave and you reduce it to the urban area, you are forcing some 20,000 people into a tiny area that would create an absolute humanitarian disaster. So it was the purpose of this plan to do just that. Now, if you look at the plan in more detail, you'll see that it was not the purpose of the plan to take the enclave at that time. It was the purpose to reduce it to its urban area, to create this horrible situation. And later in this document, you'll see it says, create a situation for the elimination of the enclave, and something to the effect, be prepared to act when given the opportunity, something any good any good military commander would do in the situation. And so it's important to note that while we see Directive 7 at work here, and we see the unlawful aim, they're not at that point trying to take the enclave. You'll see in other documents what they're worried about is the United Nations and NATO. There are other documents that say when the UN leaves, then take the enclave. So like Morion in '93, with the UN there, they're worried about their view in the world, and they're not prepared to take it. It wasn't until a little later, as the events unfold, that they became willing to, and we'll get into that. All right, if we could go to, can we get to the map with the 4 S's? I'm going to skip to the end now and show you a map that was found in the Drinacore collection. We have the original of, you won't get the full feel of it on this screen. And in fact, if we could blow it up a bit more so we can try to read the English. This is a map, an actual JNA military map of the Srebrenica enclave in the north. That looks pretty good. And the Žepa enclave in the south. This was a map that was drawn after the operations were over and were signed and stamped as an official military map, as you can see, by Major General Radislav Krstic. And what is stated on them is interesting. Srebrenica has been Serbian and remains Serbian. Then it says in 12 July 1995. And then Žepa is also Serbian, 27 July 1995. 12 July is the day they entered Potočari and finally took the enclave. And 27 July is the date that they took Žepa. And you can see they've drawn the basic attack plan, and the red is the Serbs, the blue is the Muslims, and the little initials are for the various brigades that were involved in the attack. You'll see the Zvornik Brigade involved in both. Vinko Pandurović and the Drina Wolves playing a major role in those. And you may also notice, if you look at this map, over the top of the map is written a big cross with 4 Cyrillic S's in it. And that, as you will likely know, is a Serbian national symbol, nationalist symbol. It's not just a national symbol. Had there been a flag on this map, a Serbian flag, well, that's one thing. This is a symbol of Serb nationalism, and those S's stand for only unity will save the Serbs. Now, this saying, only unity will save the Serbs, is in and of itself relatively harmless sounding, but it's based on the propaganda that was used from the very beginning of this war, that the Muslims were coming to kill us all. They are coming to commit genocide on us. We must fight for our survival. This is a a theme you hear repeatedly in the speeches of General Mladic, General Krstić, and others. And it's the very simple propaganda as a rallying cry to not just fight, but when you believe that the opposite forces are coming to commit genocide on you, that is your first step towards the dark side. And so what do we have here? I skipped to the end. Srebrenica. You can look under that cross, those 4 S's, and think of the some 7,000 people that are dead and buried under them. A little farther north in Zvornik, to be precise. And in Žepa, the people have been run out and the top leadership murdered. 3, 4, at least, people were murdered in Žepa. And so we have, as an official military map, General Krstić, who has been convicted of aiding and abetting, putting his national symbol over the top of the graves of Srebrenica. They are proud. He is proud of what he's done. It gives you an idea of the attitude of General Krstić personally, but more than that. Because, as you'll see over and over again in this case, the theme that a commander leads by example. When a commander exhibits this kind of nationalistic horror, he is signaling to his troops that it's okay. When Mladic issues orders saying remove the population, he's signaling to his generals and his troops that it's okay. When a commander allows this and sells this and pushes this and acts like this, this is what leads to the kind of tragedy we have. You'll hear Momir Nikolic. He stood up and testified that he allowed the horror of Popović happen in front of him. The kickings onto the bus, the beatings, the people being taken off. And he said by his very presence as an officer from the brigade, he contributed to what was going on. And any other officers present that allowed this to happen in front of them contributed to this. This is a very important command concept that I know General Pandurović has been taught, and I know the other people have been taught, and they've seen it happen. And a commander leads by example. The examples set early on were this. Here's a classic example. Lead by genocide. Okay. Now let's chronologically go to the case itself. Excuse me a minute. I'm going to get away from the machine for just a second. I don't know if you can all see that. There's not a perfect place to put it. Okay, if we can put it on the chair. Thank you for helping that. I hope you can get some idea of that. Well, the attack began in earnest on 6 July, and by 9 or 10 July, the Muslim forces were beginning to crumble. The UN, who had been the focus of near attacks, they shot in and around the OPs, the posts that were all around the enclave. They started moving back towards their base in Popović. At one point, I believe it was on the 7th or 8th of July, a Muslim army person got very upset by this and tossed a hand grenade onto a Dutch armored personnel carrier and killed a Dutch soldier. After that, the Dutch went to the Serb side and were taken by the VRS in a humanitarian way and set up in the Hotel Fontana. However, they were not allowed to return to their base a few short miles down the road to Popović. They were held there. And as you'll see from the evidence, they were held there as hostages. So we have hostages on the 8th of July, 9th of July. So by the 9th and 10th of July, the Muslim forces are crumbling. For some reason, the BIH forces had taken Nasser Orich and his chief people out of the enclave several weeks earlier. And so the people that were there in command tried, but got no help from NATO or the UN forces. And so by the 10th of July, it looked pretty grim for the people of the enclave. The UN is trying to get NATO airstrikes approved through the UN bureaucracy, and that's not happening. And the Muslim army is crumbling under the tough attack of Popović and the other forces. And so in discussion with Radovan Karadzic, Karadzic decides that it's time to take the enclave, that the position is right, that the UN is not putting up any resistance, and if they do, they have hostages. And so what we find the next day, on the 11th of July, is when the NATO actually does come in and as a last-ditch effort to try to bomb the Serb forces, and they do drop a couple of bombs. The NATO, the command of the Dutch battalion receives word from the Serb forces that we're going to kill your men that we have unless that stops. So that stopped. No more NATO Air Force, and the Serbs are free now to roll right in. Now we see the decision of President Karadzic on July 10th in a document, which I'll show you a little later when I get to the specific evidence regarding General Guerrero, because it's a letter from Tolomir, who is passing on the directions of the president, saying it's now time to go in and take the enclave. You'll also see the president ordering that the UNPROFOR not be touched and the civilians not be touched and the Geneva Conventions be used. That's on the 10th. Of course, the very next day, the Serb authorities threatened to kill all the hostages. But the important part about this letter is that it's directly personally to Generals Krstic and Guerrero, who at the forward command post at Popović. That shows that General Guerrero is at the command post with General Krstic, who is leading the attack. So this is a very typical Mladic command structure. He's got Milovanovic in the Krajina. He's got Tolomir in the Žepa area, and he's got Guerrero at the key point during the key moment of Srebrenica. And so on 11 July, Mladic marches triumphantly through the city of Srebrenica with Venko Popović, with Krstic, with General Živanović, who was the then Corps commander of the Drina Corps. Popović is there. You'll see this on video. It's an amazing, amazing video of what happened. And if we could go to an exhibit, I'll just take a still just to give you a bit of a flavor of the Mladic looking in to the camera that is purposefully being done. He looks into the camera and he says, "Finally, after the rebellion against the Dahis, the time has come to take revenge upon the Turks in this region." This is, again, a foreshadowing of Mladic's intent and what he has in mind. Now, the rebellion against the Dahis occurred on the 13th of July in 1817 and was an uprising of Serbs against Turkish mercenaries or rulers of some sort. So we have Mladic going back well into history and for Serb television, giving them this message, which was to foreshadow the events. So on the 10th, the 11th of July, we, in response to the Serbs making it into the town of Srebrenica after shelling civilian targets, dropping at least several mortars into a crowd of people around the Dutch battalion. The women and children and some men move towards Popović, which down here, as you can see, is just a few kilometers north of Srebrenica, and is where the main Dutch bat compound is. They have a small compound in Srebrenica, but it is under shelling and pressure from the Serbs, soon dismantled. So by the evening of 11 July, Srebrenica has been taken. Some 20 to 30,000 women and children and military and roughly 1,000 military-age men have moved into Popović. At the same time, about 15,000, mostly military-age men, but some women and children, start to move towards the villages of Shushenjari and Yaglici on the map, as you can see them. And where it has been decided that they are going to make a run for it to go through what has been an established smuggling route towards the territory of the BIH Army, which is this gray line, towards the town of Nezhuk. Now, this column is hard to estimate, but their best estimate has been about 15,000, about a third of which were armed with automatic weapons or rifles, hunting rifles, with some shoulder RPGs, shoulder-fired grenades, and little else. You'll see an amazing video scene of these men assembling, with a few with rifles, many without. And so they are gathering on the evening of the 11th and late night of the 12th and begin to head across the tough terrain from Yaglici northward. At this point, there's nothing really much stopping them but a minefield and a few civilian soldiers in trenches that really aren't prepared to handle that kind of event. And the area they go in is so rough, there's not even trenches down there. But the night of the 11th of July, there are two famous meetings between Mladic and the Dutch battalion command at the Hotel Fontana in Bratunac. The Dutch command, of course, was very concerned with the situation, was not allowed to have any outside help from NATO or from Morion was not allowed to come in, or Janvier, who would have been the person that was president and in charge at the time. And so they were on their own, and you'll see that, and you'll see how frightening this situation was. So Karaman's asked for a meeting, and they have a meeting, and Mladic at that meeting threatens Karaman, screams at him, you'll see the tape, and then ask for a Muslim representative to come an hour later. The Dutch go get a Muslim representative from the crowd, just a guy that was a teacher. And he comes that night, and Mladic talks with him, and Mladic is obsessed with the military. Where are the military? Turn, the military-age men, demanding their surrender and that everything will be fine. And he looks at this man, and you see it, and he says, "It's up to you, sir, whether your people survive or disappear." It's the most frightening genocidal talk imaginable. And then he sets up a meeting for 10 o'clock the next day where they will organize the transportation of the Muslim population out of Popović. And so the morning of the 12th, the column has started moving out, and at 10 o'clock, they meet again at the Hotel Fontana. But that morning, Serb forces, including Borovčan's forces, come in to Popović. You'll see this on the video, and take over control of the situation. This is where crimes first start happening, where the soldiers are allowed to take out their vengeance, their whatever on the civilian population. You'll hear evidence of bodies, of assaults. We have tried to put that in, most of it through 92 bis and other evidence, but it is that's when the horror of Potočari begins. Now, the night of the 11th, Mladić was together with his main commander, General Krstić, also with Živanović. He had an intel officer from the main staff named Radoslav Janković. They were all there together. Popović was in the area, was at the meeting on the morning of the 12th. It's very clear from the evidence that the plot, the plan to absolutely kill and murder the Muslim men of Potočari was hatched that night, the night of the 11th, the night of the 12th. Now, it was clear from intelligence reports that there was roughly 1,000 military-age men in the town of Potočari. So Mladić knew that on the night of the 11th. And when the army refused to surrender and nothing was going to happen, clearly Mladić had made the decision that night that the men would be separated and killed. You'll see as I discuss, the various evidence that supports that. But that's when the decision was made. You first see it again in a televised, well, not televised, but it's video. Some of it is televised, but a video of portions of that meeting. And one part that was cut out of the video was when Mladić told the assembled people at this meeting, again with the Dutch battalion, civilian members of the Muslim community and civilian members of the Bratunac community, Mladić demanded that the able-bodied men 16 to 60 be screened as war criminals. So Mladić had made the decision that night to screen men as war criminals. Okay, now, shortly after that meeting, buses, trucks arrived, and the first separations in Potočari began in the early afternoon. But what we see is no screening. What's happening is a wholesale separation of anybody from roughly 15 up to 78, as you heard the prosecutor, and some very young boys and some very old men, and everyone. No screening, no names, no interrogations to speak of, nothing. That it would have been legitimate for them to go in and look for soldiers and take soldiers aside or people suspected of being soldiers and keep them for exchange. But what was not legitimate was what they did, a wholesale separation and transport out of the area of the men. So this is the first indication that their intentions are not honorable. They had a lot of intelligence they could have gained, a lot of value in having hundreds of prisoners, because there were hundreds of Serb prisoners in Muslim prisons, and these men could have been exchanged to get their own soldiers back. But instead, wholesale screening, nobody is writing names down, and most importantly, they're not given any food, any medical help. They're put in horrendous conditions where they're jammed in buildings and vehicles, and they're beaten and starved and killed over the 2 or 3 days that the men from Potočari were stored there. So when you put all that together and you see this happening on the morning or the afternoon of the 12th, the evening of the 12th, 13th, continually goes on. It's very clear that Mladić, what he had in mind for these men of Potočari, that they were marked for death. There's no question about that when you put all the evidence together. There's a photograph we have of a huge, massive pile of IDs burning on the side of the road in Potočari, I think on the 14th of July. IDs, any documents in any military interest is a key thing to get when interrogating someone, so you know who they are, what unit they may be from, that kind of material. Burned without a care in the world. They had no idea that the international forces of NATO would be visiting them in January of the next year, and the arrogance by which they perpetrated this is amazing. So on the afternoon of 12 July, the forcible transfers and murders begin. Just to give you the briefest look of a photo of Popović, so you can get a feel for this. You'll see the video. I don't want to take the time to show you the video now, but if we have that photo of the thousands of people in Popović. I don't recall if this is the 12th or 13th, but it gives you an idea of just the masses of numbers of people. And in this crowd, you'll see military-age men, most of whom are now dead. And if we could go to the next photograph of the men separated. There's another still photograph. It's hard to tell from this photograph, but these are trucks. And the women are walking on one side of the trucks, and the men are walking on the other. They have been separated and directed. And take a look at the men. Look at these old guys. They're not interviewed. They're not interrogated. They're just separated out. And we have several of these men have been identified and presumed dead. We'll have a booklet of these stills that identify the people that have been killed. But this is the separation, the wholesale screening. Not wholesale separation, non-screening, excuse me. Okay, if we could go to I think we have another one of Mr. Popović. This is 13 July and Mr. Popović, whose troops have been in and around Popović on the 12th and 13th, taking part in the separations. This is a United Nations military observer in the forefront, Mr. Kingori from Kenya, and with a Dutch officer, and they're discussing the various events. Kingori is very concerned about what's going on right across the street from where they're standing. Don't know, do we have a picture now of the White House? Right across from where Mr. Popović is standing, and this will be made more clear in the video, is the famous White House where men, after they were separated, were taken. Here's a shot of the balcony of the White House, some, I don't know, 40 meters, 30 meters from where Popović is standing facing this. These are the Muslim men huddled in a mass looking through the slats of the balcony. All those men are to be killed later down the road, 2-3 days later. And if they're lucky, they're killed in Bratanovce by a soldier with a gun. Now, Momir Nikolić will tell you that he coordinated the separations and the movement of the population out, and he did it with a commander under Mr. Popović's command named Duškojević, known as Stalin. He's the person I spoke of earlier that is pretty good with the organization and was present in Popović, but didn't see anybody separated. Momir Nikolić will also tell you that on the morning of 12 July, after the morning meeting at the Hotel Fontana, Vojvodin Popović and the Drina Corps intelligence officer, Mr. Kosarić, came up to him and said that the decision has been made to separate the military-age men and kill them. And we need you to help organize this and help get the job done. And they ask him for locations to kill people. He provides them with the locations of something called the Brick Factory, which you may soon see. It's an area on the outskirts of Bratanovce, a lot like the Kravica warehouse, perfect for storing people to be killed. And then Momir Nikolić acknowledges that he took part in the separation and the movement of the women and children and the men, knowing that the men were all going to be killed. Okay, on the 12th of July in the evening, there is a meeting with General Mladic, General Krstić, and the brigade commanders. After Srebrenica fell on the 11th, most of the brigade commanders involved in the assault stood down briefly. They weren't exactly sure where the forces of Nasser Orj were. They thought they were in the area called the Bandera Triangle, south of the enclave. But on the 12th, Mladic called a meeting of all the commanders. And it's important to note that at this point, the murder operation has been decided. There are probably 500 to 1,000 Muslim men separated and jammed into vehicles and schools at the Vuk Karadzic school complex in Bratunac. And they're beginning to be preyed upon, beaten, killed by their captors. So just down the road from that is the meeting at the Bratunac Brigade headquarters. And it's clear that Vinko Pandorović is there with General Krstić, General Mladic. There are other brigade commanders. Mirko Trivić, the commander of the 2nd Romania Brigade, will tell us some about what happened at that meeting. I'm sure not all. But it's inconceivable that evening that Mladic and Krstić did not inform Generals Pandorović and others, Colonel Pandorović at the time, and others, of what was going on and the plan. Now, it's also important to note that at this time there had been no plan to move any prisoners up to Zvornik. All they had and all they really knew about were the 1,000 men from Potocari, and they were looking to murder them around Bratunac in places that Momir Nikolic had talked about, the brick factory. So, but given that and the import of that and the fact that they're all together in the command, it's beyond belief that they did not discuss this. But what you will hear about is that now Mladic had made the decision to take on Žepa. And so Mladic tells his commanders at a brief meeting that, okay, on to Žepa, we've got Srebrenica, on to Žepa. Some of the brigade commanders, Vinko Pandorović being one of them, stood up to Mladic and said, you know, that his troops were tired, that they needed some rest, and perhaps there were other military reasons that he had. And Mladic insisted, and the brigade commanders were able to convince Mladic to come down to this area of Viogor where the troops were established and give the troops a pep talk and get them going, which is what he did the next day. Okay, that takes us to the 13th of July. Now, on the 13th of July, we have the column moving out from Yaglichi and Shushenjari on the night of the 11th. And on the 12th, a significant number of them make it across this road, the Nova Kasaba, Konjević Polje, Bratunac road. The great flaw in the Serb intelligence is they don't realize at the time that how many did. At least 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 Muslim men made it across that road early on in this. But at least half the column got stuck back. By the night of the 12th, with the help of Borovchinen's forces and other forces coming in, the Serbs were able to seal off this road from Nova Kasaba, Konjević Polje, and to Kravica, the area where the Muslim column were advancing. So by the morning of the 13th, there was an iron ring on that road, and some 6,000 6,000 Muslim men, 6,000 Muslim men were trapped up in the woods behind it. And the Serb forces went up and down that road with megaphones and dressed in UN gear and with UN APCs, calling them down to surrender, that they would be safe, that the UN would look out for them, and many did. 6,000 under the Serb numbers. On the 13th, this happened, and they were assembled at various places, Sandici, Nova Kasaba, and sent to the warehouse in Kravica. Now, it's the morning of the 13th, another watershed date and time to remember that the organized mass executions really begin. Before that, we've seen isolated acts of brutality and death. Isolated. In the context of Srebrenica, that means 100 people minimum, bodies piling up in the Vukovar school complex, bodies in the woods in Popović. But we don't see the kind of organized mass executions that this case is known for. But on the morning of 13 July, 16 men or Muslims are assembled at the intersection of Konjević-Polje, and they're put on a bus, and they're taken up to an area just north of that, along the river, the Yadar River, just about here. We'll get a better map of that so you can see that. And they're taken down to the river and executed. We know that because a man survived that. He was shot through the shoulder, fell into the river, and the river had a pretty good current, and it washed him away. And he managed to survive and tell the story. And he's got a bullet hole in his shoulder to prove it. But the important thing about this story is that they took a bus. Now, a bus at this time of day was a crucial item because they were really trying to get the women and children out of Popović. So for the military or the MUP to get a bus showed that there's some organization behind these killings, and that killing 16 people using a bus is not something privates or sergeants are going to do on their own. So that's our first indication that we have an organized mass execution going on. Then a little bit later, maybe 12, 1 o'clock, we have a witness that sees 3 busloads of Muslims go down a little road towards the Sirska Valley, right here. He's up in the woods looking down, and he sees it followed by an APC with soldiers, and then shortly after by an excavator. And he hears all kinds of gunfire, and shortly thereafter the buses come back empty, and the bulldozer comes back, and as does the APC. As he's trying to escape north, he comes across an area that had horrible smell, and he showed us that area. And back in, I believe it was 1998, we excavated that and found 150 Muslim men with their hands tied behind their back with wire ligatures and shell casings all over the road, and dirt that had obviously been moved by an excavator just thrown on top of them. So that murder happened about 1 o'clock p.m. Obviously, again, the important part about this murder for our purposes is it had 3 buses, an APC, and an excavator. Privates, sergeants, they don't do that on their own. This mass execution is happening at this point at the highest channels now. Sirska Valley shows it. But what perhaps the VRS didn't understand is the massive amount of prisoners they would get. By the afternoon of 13 July, it's not just 150 men here or 16 men there. They literally have 5,000 or 6,000 people assembled. And I believe it becomes clear to them that they cannot kill all these people in Bratunac. Though you'll hear testimony that Beara wanted to. He wanted to start doing it and was very angry when they didn't. But on the evening of 13 July, most of the prisoners that had been held in Nova Kasaba and Sandici, these big fields, had been transported to Bratanac or the village of Kravica where they were stored. About 1,000 of them were put in this Kravica warehouse just outside the little village area. And in the afternoon, it was decided that they should be murdered. Near the same time that buses were being transported down the road. They parked buses in front of the warehouse and they began killing people. And the killing lasted for hours and hours. There was at least 800 to 1,000 people in two sides of this warehouse. I'm going to go into that in more detail with you when I get to Borovchanin, because this is a murder crime that you really need to understand the warehouse and what the witnesses are saying and what Borovchanin is saying. It's a whole event within a trial itself. And it's, unlike most of these cases, the detail of this event will be important for your consideration. Okay, now, as I mentioned, there were so many prisoners on the 13th, they couldn't kill them all, and they made the decision to move them up to Zvornik. We know this. Well, Momir Nikolic tells us this. In fact, Momir Nikolic says that he goes and sees Drago Nikolic and provides him the information about that. But we also have a survivor from a school in Bratanac who was put in a vehicle along with 50 to 100 others and shipped up to the Zvornik area the night of the 13th and put in the Orahovac school. Right here, not far from the Zvornik Brigade headquarters. So we know that on the night of the 13th that they realize they cannot kill everyone in the Bratanac area. You'll hear a famous intercept between Miroslav Deronic, the head of the SDS party, and Radovan Karadzic, where Karadzic is told of the thousands in the schools and says, yes, but get them into warehouses outside. And Deronic says, yes, yes. And Deronic will testify about that. So on the 13th, the Muslim men are beginning to be sent off to Zvornik. Now, on the 13th, Colonel Pandurovic was sent with his troops to Zhepa and was in the Zhepa area of operations at the time this decision was made, but he would have been in radio contact and been able to be identified. And this is the kind of thing, as I go back to Deputy Commander, that he would have been told about. And you'll hear about the evidence that he was told about it, but he's on the radio, he's available, and he's contactable by the radio. But the next day, in the morning of the 14th, the attack begins, and his troops are a part of that attack. Anyway, back to the evening of the 13th, this is where the Muslims are held at the schools, some few hundred that night, but then for whatever reason, under the darkness or the security situation, because the Muslim column is still out there, they stop their transporting that night. And on the morning of the 14th, they gather a massive convoy of buses and trucks to load these some 5,000, perhaps 6,000 Muslim men and boys that have been stored in Bratanac and Kravica, the surviving ones, and ship them up to Zvornik. This column is led by Lieutenant Colonel Popović and the chief of the Bratanac Brigade military police and others. On the afternoon of 14 July, the organized murders began at the Orahovac school. Men are taken out of the school building, put on little Zvornik Brigade trucks, moved about less than a kilometer down the road, unloaded, and summarily executed by firing squad, members of the Zvornik Brigade. All of this is done by members of the Zvornik Brigade. And specifically, the 4th Battalion are involved. At the same time, there are people that have been moved to the schools at Petkovci, Rochevich, and in the school at Kula in the area of Pilica and the Pilica Cultural Center. I will go in some more detail about each of the accused, their whereabouts, and their involvement at the end, probably tomorrow. The executions at Popović started late night, the 14th, after the executions had finished at Orahovac. Went all night, probably 800 to 1,000 persons murdered. We don't know who actually pulled the trigger during that. We know that the battalion, I believe it's the 6th Battalion of the Zvornik Brigade, was involved in transporting people to be killed, and the school was right across the street from the battalion command post. And you'll hear testimony from the battalion commander and deputy commander about Beara being present and organizing these prisoners. The next day, on the 15th, Popović has been given an urgent call from Obrenović. The column is really beginning to threaten Zvornik on the 14th. There's clashes here between the column and the Zvornik Brigade forces. The Zvornik Brigade realizes that it's not the 200 or 300 that they originally thought. It's more like 5,000, and Obrenović is getting pretty panicked. And so on the night of the 14th, he calls for urgent help and asks for Vinko Popović. But I left out a key point. I'm sorry, I want to go back on Obrenović. As you know, Obrenović pled guilty. And on the evening of the 13th, Obrenović will testify that while he's dealing with the column, he gets a phone call from Drago Nikolic, who has been assigned to be at the Zvornik Brigade forward command post up here in the woods. And roughly what Drago Nikolic tells him is that thousands of prisoners are coming to Zvornik. It's been ordered that they be detained and shot, and that he needs to be relieved from his duties at the forward command post to help organize this and facilitate it. Obrenović says, wait a minute, we've got to have authority from our commander on this. And Nikolic says it's coming from the top, and he's been contacted and by Popović, I believe, and that it's coming from the top, that the command is coming from the commanders. At that point, Obrenović, trusting his security officer and being part of what Obrenović called the vortex of hatred, relieved Drago Nikolic from his responsibility, authorized him to get military police to begin the job of guarding and receiving these prisoners and killing them, and authorized the entire murder operation for that area, and pled guilty to that. So, but getting back to the 14th, he manages to get through to the Drina Corps command, who gets through to Popović. Popović comes back mid-morning, probably around noon on the 15th. Now, when Popović arrives, everyone at Orahovac is dead, and the burying process is continuing. That's roughly 1,000 people. Everyone from Popović is dead, and the burying process is happening that day that he's coming back. And this is Zvornik Brigade engineering officers and equipment that are involved in this massive burial process. So when he comes back, everybody from those two schools is dead, roughly 2,000 people. But there are still at least 1,500 located in Pilica, in the cultural center, and the school at Kula, and maybe 500, maybe 800 located in the school in Ročević, who are in the process of being killed as he comes back. Obrenović reports all of this to him. Fundamentally, that they're having problems guarding and burying all these people. There's no mention of problems killing them. It's the guarding them and burying them is a big problem. And Pondorovic's response to Obrenović on that point was civil protection was supposed to take care of that. Now, civil protection is the outfit that does sanitation and burials, and had taken care of this in Bratunaz. So this was an indication to Obrenović that Pondorovich had been informed and was probably not happy about his units having to take part in this to take them away from their duties, and had been informed that civil protection would be doing that. He's not concerned about the deaths of these men. He's concerned about his units and men that would take them away from their military duties. So after Pondorovich gets briefed on Obrenović, has other meetings at the brigade command, he does what a good commander should do, and he goes out to the front and leads the defense. He initially argued with Obrenović and the other folks who said, we need to open a column, we need to open this and let these people through, because we're going to lose too many troops in the process. We can't deal with the situation. The situation is thus: the front line is here. BIH troops are here north of Nezuk with artillery, with men in trenches, with other equipment, and you've got some 6,000 partially armed men coming at them from their rear. And on the night of the 15th, Zvornik is in trouble. And initially, Pondorovich disagrees and wants to take on this whole column, but when he gets there, there's a huge, in the morning of the 16th, and you'll read about it in the intercepts, and there's a 19th century battle is the only way I can describe it. Just hundreds of, many of them unarmed men, swarming over trenches of the Zvornik Brigade, taking their heavy weapons and turning them on the Zvornik Brigade. By the early morning hours of the 16th, the Zvornik Brigade has lost some 50 people. Now, in this war, 50 people in a morning battle is enormous losses. And it's at that point that Pondorovich rethinks his decision, and eventually the decision is made to open up an area to allow the rest of the people to go through. That stays open for a couple of days and then is closed. But it's done not out of humanitarian reasons, but because 50 Serb boys were killed because of Mladic's wonderful scheme to take the Srebrenica enclave. So also on the day of the 16th, the executions continue. Popović is involved in, and so is Beara, in the killings up in Pilica, where there's some, as I said, about 1,000 people at the school, maybe 500 in the cultural center. You'll see the specific evidence that showing their involvement, and the 10th Sabotage Detachment that was brought in to help the killing process. But the killing occurred at the Branjevo military farm. It's called the Branjevo military farm because it was just that. It was a unit of the Zvornik Brigade that raised pigs and grew crops to feed the troops, and it was led by an officer and had soldiers working there. And this was made available for this operation, and it was Vinko Pondorovic's unit and Vinko Pondorovic's land. And it was his soldiers that helped make all this happen. They were guarding the people at the school. They were holding down the Branjevo farm. The 10th Sabotage came in to actually do most of the killing, and then moved down to the Pilica Cultural Center in the afternoon of the 16th to kill off the people at the Cultural Center. On the 15th, the executions had occurred at a place called Kozluk, just so that sticks in your head. And It's not far from the Rochevich School. Now, after the murders in Pilica on 19th of July, we see many Muslim groups are still caught in the woods and running around, and a unit from the Krajina Corps that was sent and resubordinated to Vinko Pandurović captured a group of people, about, I think there was 10 of them, and according to the survivor, they got on the radio, talked to someone on the radio, and after that, everyone was, except one, was shot and killed. Our survivor was shot in the back and rolled down a hill and was able to escape to tell us this. But those men were under the command of Vinko Pandurović, resubordinated to his brigade. You'll see the order by, or the directive by General Militic assigning that Krajina Corps crew to Zvornik to help the situation, the combat situation that was going on. So you can see from some amazing evidence the linkage between all these people. I'm not going to go into the detail of all the other murders. You'll hear about the murder of some 16 patients that were seriously injured near Milici, down in the south, and were sent to the Zvornik hospital. But instead of the ICRC being brought in, these seriously injured people were sent to the Zvornik Brigade headquarters on around the 14th, 15th, something like that, and were held in their area, in their medical area. And you'll hear from the doctors from the Zvornik hospital came and treated them. And Obrenović went in and looked after them because there was issues related to the soldiers not liking Muslims being in the command. And shortly after this, Popović arrived, and those prisoners were taken out, and they've never been seen since. Why they needed to kill 16 people from Milici that were seriously injured patients, I don't know, but they did. We have their names. They're clearly on the missing list. And Mr. Popović is related to that. We know from a survivor of the Branievo farm that he, in his escape from under the bodies on the 16th, he finds 4 other survivors from the Branievo farm, and he learns about what villages they're from, and he sees the blood on them and hears their story. And then a few days later, they were assisted by a couple of soldiers from the Zvornik Brigade and given a sandwich and told where the front line was. These guys were farmers. I think they were helping their family at the time and helped out these 4 pathetic Muslim guys. Well, those 4 guys, the Muslims, got captured later on and were interrogated by Drago Nikolić's MPs and admitted they were helped by some Zvornik folks. The MPs, Nikolić was able to identify who the soldiers were that helped them, and Vinko Pandurović and Drago Nikolić prosecuted those Serb soldiers that assisted these guys by giving them a sandwich and telling them where the front line is. They prosecuted them for assisting the enemy and punished them. And you'll see the documents that support that. So we have the names of these 4 Muslim survivors. And you won't be surprised to hear that all 4 of those names are on the ICRC missing list, because after they were used as witnesses against the Serbs, they were executed. Maybe someday their bones will be identified and their loved ones will know that. Okay, we've got a little time left, and I don't want to take too much time tomorrow. So if you don't mind, I think I'll start with Chapter 3 and which I call the linkage material. And with the help of Ms. Stewart, we'll go through that. And the first linkage material I want to talk about is, well, the first person we'll talk about is General Militich. And the first document I want to go to is a document you've seen part of. It's Directive 7, the famous Directive 7, where it was drafted by Militich, where he wrote out the part about make life unbearable. Well, there's also a part at the very end, which I believe Janet has marked for us, regarding the logistic support for this operation. And I'm sorry if I could take just 1 second to grab that. And I'll just read it briefly. The relevant state and military organs responsible for work with UNPROFOR and humanitarian organizations shall, through a planned and unobtrusively restrictive issuing of permits, reduce and limit the logistics support of UNPROFOR to the enclaves and supply of material resources to the Muslim population, making them dependent on our goodwill, while at the same time avoiding condemnation by the international community and international public opinion. All right, they're making the Muslims dependent upon their goodwill, keeping the supplies to a minimum, yet not so bad that the international community is going to notice. You'll see the evidence to support exactly what they did. So this goes along with making life unbearable. And General Militich played a major role in the convoys and what convoys went and what convoys didn't. And let's go now to an 18 June document. This is a June 18th it's called an open message under the name of General Militich. It's from the main staff, and it's I'm not going to read it all to you, but it's talking about supplying the various materials to the enclaves. And in the end of it, General Militich says, and this is, you can see he's sending it to the Zvornik Brigade and the various brigades that have to do with the enclaves. I demand a detailed check of all vehicles, including the inspection of cargo. Pay special attention to the fuel in the fuel tanks and the fuel being brought into the enclaves. Check the documents and the identity of all persons on board. Make a list of their names and their ID cards in order to ensure that the persons who enter the enclaves must leave the enclaves upon the completion of the task. Now, this shows that General Militich is playing a very important role in this. Now, on its face, there's nothing criminal about this, but it does indicate to us the role he's playing. And he can say to the Zvornik Brigade, I demand a detailed, now is that an order from a commander? No. Is it a directive you have to follow? Yes. This is consistent with Mladich's overall order, Directive 7, and the other materials that we've seen establishing the policy. And you'll see, speaking of fuel, how fuel was restricted and strangled. So by the time Dutch Bat was there in July when these events happened, they didn't have any fuel to run their air conditioning or their electrical, and they couldn't go out in vehicles. And this is all the main staff's doing through their corps, through their brigades, as it was done with General Militich. Okay, one more, I think, the 13th July document. Thank you. Now, this is an amazing document that was found recently in the Drina Corps collection, jammed in amongst a whole bunch of other telegrams, and obviously missed by anybody going through this material. It's a communication authored by Lieutenant Colonel Milomir Savcic. Milomir Savcic is the commander of the 65th Protection Regiment. He is in a place called Borike, down by Žepa, where Ptolemir has been stationed to look after the Žepa attack. And Savcic has received a proposal from Ptolemir regarding all these massive amounts of prisoners that are being caught in the area of Nova Kasaba and Sandici. And so I want to look at every word on this one because we don't see many documents like this. It's entitled Procedure for Treatment of Prisoners of War. To the commander of the GSVRS, that's the main staff. That's, of course, Mladic. And for his information, Assistant Commander for Religious and Legal Affairs. And for his information, we know who that is, that's Guerrero. And the commander of the Military Police Battalion of the 65th Protection Regiment. That's this guy Malinic, who I mentioned to you, that introduced a Dutchman to Beara. And it says, order. There are over 1,000 members of the former 28th Division of the so-called BIH Army captured in the area of Dushonovo, or Kasaba. Prisoners are under the control of the Military Police Battalion of the 65th Protection Regiment. Okay, well, they have a unit there in Nova Kasaba, and so it's natural that they have been the ones that are dealing with all these prisoners. Assistant Commander for Security and Intelligence Affairs of the main staff, of course we know who that is, Ptolemir, proposes the following measures. Prohibit access to all unauthorized individuals filming and photographing of prisoners. Prohibit traffic for all United Nations vehicles en route to Zvornik, Vlasenica until further notice. Commander of the Military Police Battalion shall take measures to remove war prisoners from the main Milici-Zvornik road, place them somewhere indoors or in an area protected from observation from the ground or the air. Now, these hundreds of prisoners, as I've said before, are a great bargaining tool to receive for exchange. And the first thing you would want to do in that situation is bring in the ICRC, get these people registered, get them, and you can screen the ones that are military-age men and get them taken care of. Why in the world would you hide them unless you had some nefarious activity? And let's look at who they're hiding them from. Perhaps you hide them from the Bosnian Muslim army that might try to break them out. But that's completely unrealistic. They are the Bosnian Muslim army. They're nowhere near the Second Corps forces at this point. There's no Air Force. There's no way that the Bosnian army can do anything about these guys. So who are they keeping them from when they're being observed from the ground or the air? The only people that are in the air in July of 1995 are NATO. They don't want these guys seen by NATO. They don't want the international community to know they exist. This is a very strong indication that the murder operation is in play. These people are to be hidden from the international community so they can be killed. Mr. Savcic was shown this document and wouldn't contest it, but wouldn't acknowledge it. And I asked him who who are they hiding these guys from? And he said, well, NATO. And I asked, well, why are they hiding them from NATO? And he thought about that for a bit and said, well, we would have been concerned that NATO mistook them for being Serbs and would have bombed them. And again, you can tell from an answer like that that he doesn't want to be anywhere near this, and it really tells us what this document's about. But then let's go on in the document. Once the commander of the military police battalion receives this order, he shall contact General Milicic and receive from him additional orders and verify if the proposal has been approved by the commander of the main staff. Okay, so we have Tolomir involved in this, we've got Guevara involved in this, we've got Milicic involved in this, we've got Mladic involved. One document, they've got them all. Now, this is the lineup. It's the lineup for genocide. And it importantly shows who the important players are. Milicic is going to be issue orders relating to these guys. This is an extremely important document to show you who is important, who's involved, and what they're up to. And I think this is probably a place where I need to stop.
Okay, I thank you so much, Mr. McCloskey. You may sit down. You will continue tomorrow. So we're finished at 13:29. Okay, earlier on, I mentioned an outstanding motion that was filed confidential and under seal relating to a request from the prosecution for protective measures for four different persons. As far as possible, I would like to have the debate in open session. However, if any names of witnesses are going to be mentioned in particular, then obviously we will need to go into private or closed session. I don't think there is a need to mention witnesses by name. You can actually refer to them the same way they have been referred in the motion itself, namely by reference to the pseudonym that was used in each case in either or both of the previous cases, the Kirstic and the Blagojevich one. Who is going to address Madame Nikolic? Is it going to be
Your Honor.
a joint submission, or is it only on behalf of your client?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
This would be a joint submission on our part to avoid unnecessary repetition. We shall briefly address the trial chamber on the defense's position relative to the prosecution's request for protective measures for the four witnesses who ought to be heard in the first session. All the defense teams do not oppose the prosecution request for measures for the four witnesses, since these are witnesses who had been accorded protective measures under Rule 75F earlier. What the defense wishes to tell the trial chamber is as follows, that one of the witnesses, marked L, who testified in the Milosevic case as B13 1999, The matter of the fact is that in the Blagojevich case, this same witness testified in an open session without any protective measures.
This part
Ja se
of the
izvinjavam.
I apologize.
transcript.
Molila bih
We
onda
are
da pređemo
transmitting.
da,
One
na
moment,
zakon.
Madam Nicolai.
Could we move?
Madam Registrar, we are transmitting with a 30-minute delay, I suppose? Yes, okay, so we need to redact from line
22, page 87.
yes, page 87, line
22 to
22, yes,
24.
to 24. Thank you, Judge Ogon. Yes, let's go into private session, and you're free to make any comment you like, and when you finish